Shalom, it's the time, hit the mic, realign, Torah flow so divine, got the grind by design, from the shtetl to the limelight, stars in the scene, schmoozing pride, bringing dreams, keep it kosher clean. Schmoozing time, where the real ones meet, Jewish pride, beats hit, can't retreat, personal brands leveled up, take the stage, schmoozing vibe, wisdom out the cage.
Hey schmoozers, welcome back to the show. And if this is your first time tuning in, my name is David Cobby, and I'm so glad that you are listening to this episode today. Before we jump in, I just truly want to thank you for being here. It genuinely means so much to me that you're taking time out of your busy day to listen to this podcast. I also want to make sure that everybody's following the show on whatever platform you're listening on. This way, you will never miss another amazing conversation. Now, you're probably listening to this episode for one of two reasons. One, you're my lucky listener that I pay $1,000 a month to listen to every episode and take detailed notes. Or two, you're someone like me and my guest who is searching for a stronger, more authentic Jewish identity. This week's guest knows exactly what it feels like to struggle with your Jewish identity. She grew up Orthodox, stepped away for a bit, and eventually found her way back to teaching Judaism through Talmud, text, and being creative on her own terms. With a mix of humor, storytelling, and raw authenticity, she is reimagining what it means to connect with Judaism in a way that's very personable and also deeply authentic. Let's get into it today. Please welcome to the show, Miriam Anzovin. Miriam, how are we doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here with you to get to talk about all of these things because, yes, I have a lot of personal feelings and experience about them, and I'm just thrilled that you have this podcast where you get to explore them too. So thank you for having me.
Of course. And I always try and pick people that are unique across the spectrum and not necessarily in this one box of Judaism. I hate, and I'm sure you can agree with this, I hate the terms Orthodox and conservative and reform. Like it's all bullshit to me. It's all like, we're all Jewish. We're all here to be proud Jews. So I feel like you kind of fit across that boxes, right? I mentioned there that you used to be Orthodox, and now, but I think for somebody that knows about Orthodoxy and Judaism, they go to your page and they see that you're teaching Talmud, so they're probably like, oh, she's Orthodox, but which exactly proves my point that there are no boxes in Judaism. So I guess, like, for starters, give yourself an intro, hype yourself up a little bit. I always tell my guests, hype yourself up, because people don't hype themselves up a little bit.
You're so right.
Miriam, floor is yours.
Thank you. I should hype myself up. I'm terrible at doing that. I truly love what I do, though. I would describe myself as a massive Jewish nerd, first and foremost. I love Judaism so much and all the permutations in which I have encountered it. And as you said, I was Orthodox growing up, but I come from a Baal Tshuva family, a family that became Orthodox over time. So I remember when I was very, very small, we did have a Christmas tree. And then I grew up a little bit. We went to a Reform congregation, a conservative congregation, and then we became Shomer Shabbat. We stopped driving on Shabbat. So we walked to our local Chabad house, in which I got, and then I went to a Chabad Lubavitch day school. So I had a Chabad adjacent sort of Orthodox experience, I would say. And then, as you said, I had a bit of a crisis of faith when I was about 20. Many people, I'm sure, can relate to that experience and the struggle that you have. And like, how do I cope now that this big part of my identity, because Judaism was such a massive part of my identity, what to do when you feel like that faith and belief has gone without you knowing where it went, how to get it back, because you can't really force it to come back. So I had quite a few years in there where I wasn't really doing anything particularly Jewish per se. I am using sarcastic quote marks because when I say Jewish, I mean the kind of Judaism I had been familiar with, and I recognize the limitations of my understanding of that, just my own personal experience. But I was working at Jewish nonprofits because what else was I going to do with a degree in Judaic studies? I truly don't know. And there, a few years ago, I want to say like 7 or 8 at this point, honestly, I had the great privilege of hearing Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory talk about Talmud.
Mm-hmm.
Talmud being something I had never hitherto encountered. Even in, I had a good Jewish education. Again, my degree is in Judaic studies, but Talmud had been kind of something that felt off limits to me. Certainly, it wasn't really something we engaged with as girls in the Lubavitch Yeshiva I attended. We did a little bit, but not a ton. It was really for the boys. And then growing up, I just was intimidated by it, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. But then I heard Rabbi Sachs speak about Talmud, and not only speak about Talmud, but speak about this practice called Daf Yomi, which is the 7.5-year practice of learning one page, one double-sided page of the Babylonian Talmud every single day. And it takes 7.5 years, but you do it side by side, basically, with everybody else doing it. You all start at the same day, pretty much, which was, in my case, in our case, in the current cycle, January 5th, 2020. And you go on learning one page a day together. And in that way, you meet each other on the page. And you might live completely separate lives from each other, have nothing else basically in common, but you have that shared journey through this incredible, confusing, beautiful, traumatic, enlightening text of the Jewish people, which is the Talmud. And I was just so inspired that day in a way that I don't think I've ever experienced before. And I decided, I think I want to do Daf Yomi, which seemed so like a surreal choice to make. But now here I am 5 years in, 5 years into Daf Yomi, which is bananas if I think about it, truly, coming from absolutely no Talmudic learning whatsoever to being 5 years in, and not only being 5 years in, but people wanted to join me on this learning journey as I make videos about what I'm encountering in the text, the things that I struggle with, the things that I love, all of it. And it's been a true beyond privilege to, I never thought anybody in a million years would watch these videos. I really did it in a way for me to understand better, just basically talking to myself in my phone during the pandemic to help myself understand the text a little bit better. And I never thought really anyone else would see it. And yet here I am.
When you said that the pandemic was 5 years ago, I was like, wait a second. 5 years ago, like all of us were like sitting cooped up inside, and like absolutely ridiculous that to think that like we have gone through this entire process.
Yeah.
And it's 5 years is just like it's like such a crazy amount of time to think like how much has changed in the world since then.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely incredible. And I mean, first of all, your story, not only is your story incredible, but I love how you kind of mentioned how you like took a step back and you tested the waters with Talmud, which wasn't taught to you in school, which I don't personally like see a reason. Like I consider myself more religious than not religious. I personally don't see a reason why a woman can't sit and learn Talmud, but whatever. Maybe there's a rabbi out there there's probably a rabbi out
I
there.
can tell you exactly why they think that. But
Yeah, why is that?
Well, firstly, I'm going to blame my nemesis from, 1800 years ago, Eliezer ben Harkness, who famously said in a tractate of the Talmud, he talked about, it's tractate Sotah, I believe, if anyone wants to go look this up. But he said, if you teach your daughter Torah, it's essentially the same thing as teaching her to be a slut. Which one would think the more Torah you know, the better, right? One would think that. But, we're talking about the ways that people thought men thought 2,000 years ago. And some men still think that now. And occasionally to this very day, if I make a comment, because I approach it from a millennial feminist perspective, I have the Orthodox knowledge that I bring to it, but also I have the feminist perspective in the current moment that I bring to it. I try not to always look back and project my current morality on things that happened such a very long time ago, but I am exploring it and learning it now. So I am going to react to it as a woman who lives now. And when I do have some comments that maybe some men do not agree with, they'll say, and this is exactly why you have proven his point, because this is why women should not learn Talmud, because they disagree with my interpretation or the lessons that I am taking away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, classic Eliezer ben Harkness, suck up. It's clear that some people keep Talmud relegated to certain demographics because they're the people who are supposed to have quote unquote authority within Judaism. And when you open that up a little bit more and you allow more types of Jews and other people to explore this and find what really resonates for them, what has great meaning for them, maybe what doesn't, because it's not all going to resonate with everybody. There's plenty of stuff that I'm like, no, thank you. And there's plenty of stuff that I'm like, that's actually brilliant. Mm-mm. It's a mix.
Yeah.
The more voices we have, I find it's actually better and more reflective of the Talmud itself. Because what is the Talmud? People think that they know all the time, and people, especially on social media, think they know all the time when they have their cute little PDFs of ridiculous bullshit, non-existent quotes from the Talmud that they use to like blame Jews for everything. The Talmud is a series of discussions, conversations arguments between hundreds of rabbis called the sages over a long time, hundreds of years, and across time and space, because not only is this conversations happening in Eretz Israel, it's also happening in Babylonia, which became, after the Romans, boo hiss, fuck Rome, quote me on that, Babylonia became sort of the center of Jewish learning in exile. So you have all these incredible conversations happening all around this area. They don't agree with each other all the time. That's kind of the beauty of it. If they did agree, it wouldn't take 7.5 years to learn the whole thing. Mm-hmm. It really is about discussion and debate and disagreement. Now, it's supposed to be disagreement for the sake of heaven, right? That's a very important part of it. But disagreement is a key part of the Talmud.
I was just explaining to somebody who I work with that there's this idea in Judaism that if you ask two rabbis a question, you're going to get 3 answers. And I think the Talmud is like a perfect example of how arguing and disagreement is good and pushing back on things is good. Now, there is a certain level to where pushing back on things gets outrageous. And, there's countless examples of that. But I feel like there's a lost art in having a disagreement. And I think society today, you could point a finger at anybody, and I think myself included is part of this group, where whether it comes to politics or sports or life in general, there's always some sort of like disagreement that occurs and people get very upset. They get emotional, which is normal. But again, learning how to disagree is super important. So as a Talmud expert, do you feel like the Talmud has helped you learn how to disagree with people?
I'm gonna say firstly, I do not describe myself as a Talmud expert. I'm a Talmud learner.
Okay,
I am a Talmud nerd. I haven't even completed the whole shebang. Like, I couldn't possibly describe myself thusly. Sure. I'm just an enthusiast, really.
Okay, way to be humble. I appreciate it.
But I will say something about Talmudic disagreements. They can be quite vehement, let me say. There are quite a few stories in the Talmud that get real nasty between two sages or two schools of thought, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, whatever it happens to be. There's instances, more than one. Okay. I know many people may be familiar because it is associated with the holiday of Lag BaOmer, the story of Shimon Bar Yochai, who famously laser-eyed people he disagreed with. Okay. But that is not the only instance in which the Talmud tells stories of rabbis basically using their minds to disintegrate their opponents. It's not a real disintegrate. Like, I think we can look into this as like a literary metaphor. I don't think they're going around actually doing this, but it speaks to the kind of real passionate feeling they had about the topics that were being discussed. And we have to remember, they're trying to figure out how to be Jewish in exile. They're looking back and trying to figure out what used to happen in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple that was destroyed by the Romans. What did they do? How do we take Judaism now that we don't have that anymore, now that we are spread out far more, now that we're not having this connection with the land that this is all based around because we are forced out of it? How do we make Judaism portable? And they're really struggling with this. And sometimes they have a lot of disagreements. And sometimes they are not always polite to each other. There is a book that I do love called Talmudic Insults and Curses by Arthur Helft. And I have to say that it has been truly great in terms of replying to trolls online, because I'm just using Talmudic quotes that the sages used against each other. So when people get mad at me for that, I'm just quoting Talmud. It's ancient disses for modern trolls.
Yes.
So I really believe, like, yes, they do model ways of arguing and reconciling when they have vehement disagreements. And also there's illustrations that are quite the opposite, where you get stories of them being so angry with each other, they like throw each other out of the school of learning, of the Beit Midrash. They're like, get out. Nope, I'm not listening to anything you have to say. And there's times that they have to make teshuvah. They have to do repentance, returning about that, and learn some humility themselves. And I think that is a really good example. I, for sure, will not always get things correct. And sometimes I can be a little... on social media, if people try to like harass me on social media, or especially if they try to harass my fans on social media, or my supporters on social media, or if I'm in somebody else's comments and I see another woman being harassed on social media, I'm gonna say some things. I'm gonna say some shit. But I try to have that shit come directly from the Talmud, so it's also a learning opportunity.
I like how you credibly back yourself up with Talmud as an insult. It's great. It's a great strategy.
This is my thought process about that. I think sometimes who owns Judaism, who gets to speak for Judaism, is defined by who can access and utilize the texts of Judaism. What we have to have a through line, right? Some continuity that traces these ideas. Those ideas might develop and change and morph. They have throughout history. But there has to be something that connects them to as far back as we can go in our Jewish learning and Jewish tradition, and root them in that. And from that can grow, nuance to that and different ideas out of that. But it has to be based in text. Maybe people will disagree with me on that, but I truly do believe that is the way to make any sort of argument. Otherwise, we are leaving the text to only a certain group of people, when really it is the birthright of all Jews. This knowledge belongs to all Jews. Whatever Eliezer ben Harkness might say, it really does belong to all of us. And in order for us to fully understand who we want to be as Jewish people, who we can be as Jewish people, what things we can take from this and bring into the modern era and then into the future, how we want to develop that, it has to be rooted in our ancient texts and ancient traditions. That's my belief.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Miriam, I'm like, I usually with my guests, I try and find something to like disagree with them.
Me. Go.
I'm trying, no, but I'm like trying to figure out like what you just said. I'm like going back through my head, like playing through what you just said. And like, I can't figure out anything that I disagree with. So maybe I'll start getting a little bit more heated. But I think one thing that you said there that I that kind of just popped in my head, and there's an article about this in the Wall Street Journal that talks about how I think it was 1/3 of people today, not people. It's like 1/3 of people ages 18 to 24 today don't consider themselves religious, and that's, I think, ambiguous. But I think what that really gets into is this idea that people don't have a guiding path of some sort. And for me, I believe that you could pave your own path and you do things on your own, but how are you going to get there? Like what's step A for you, right? Like what's step one? And I think just what you were talking about there with the text and having things being in writing, it's so important. I think for religion, it's like, you have to have some sort of text to guide you down a path so you kind of know what you're doing. And if you're just following a person that does things based on whatever,
based on the vibes.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't know if that's necessarily like the right way of going about religion.
I think that's fair. I think with myself, let me bring it back to my own experience in this.
Mm-hmm.
I think in this particular moment in which we're recording, I don't know if I would describe myself necessarily as religious, because in my mind that's still associated with the religion, the way of being religious in which I was raised, and I can't be that anymore. And I would describe myself previously perhaps as OTD, off the derech. And for anyone who's listening who's not familiar with this term, this is usually sort of like a overall umbrella term to refer to somebody who used to be orthodox, observant, from however you want to phrase it, and then stepped off the path. And to some people, that's like they're off. We're writing them off. We're sitting Shiva for them. They're dead to us, right? And in an extreme form, because they could not walk that exact same path anymore. But I think it's also really important to remember that we learn that the Torah has 70 faces, and it doesn't necessarily literally mean 70, or that's just a great Jewish number to work with, or faces, just multiple ways of perceiving, of interpreting, of encountering, of embodying. And when we see the sages of the Talmud not always agreeing with each other, trying though to base it in tradition and extrapolate from there why they're choosing a particular path. If you can, point to me in a text why you're choosing it, hey, I actually will be like, okay, hey, it wouldn't be my interpretation, but I see exactly how you got there, and I respect that. I also acknowledge that our texts, and this may be a shock to people, were written by men. Okay, I know this is a crazy thing to say. So sometimes in the current era, encountering it as a woman, my path forward has to be developed actually in opposition to some things I encounter, which does not mean I am not learning from the Talmud. It's me taking the Talmud, seeing how they reach their conclusion, seeing, was sexism part of that? And trying to figure out backwards, okay, there's something in here that still has immense value. And maybe that immense value can come from disagreeing with some of the perceptions and hot takes, because the Talmud is nothing if full of hot takes that I find in there, because again, these are the interpretations of men who lived 2,000 years ago. And we recognize that. That's just the historical reality. As they wrote down the oral tradition, it was sort of solidified through their discussions, as it had to be written down because, again, Rome. Otherwise, it was going to go bye-bye forever. So they had to write it down. So we have to remember also that the sages of the Talmud are human beings with their own failings, their own incredible aspects, their own personal drama that they have. They are human beings like us. And that's actually why I love them so much. And I want to spend time with them. And truth is, I spend more time with them, with a group of people who lived 1,800, 2,000 years ago than sometimes I do with my own friends who live now, which says a lot about my nerddom. But as long as you can trace a path, like for me, I don't describe myself as religious, but what is it that I have decided to dedicate 7.5 years to doing this ritualistic practice every single day and devote like 10 to 12 hours of a day to make a video about it and make this my whole personality now, because I frankly don't have time for anything but Talmud.
Right. And your dogs.
And my dog, and my beloved dog. Yeah. My beloved dog, Sansa, who has made her appearances on the show on Daf Reactions several times. But the goal is to try to encourage people to have their own relationship with the text. Will they always agree with it? No. Will it always match with their personal feelings and connections with God or with spirituality? That's the question. Can they find places of reconciliation, places that make sense to them? And that's what I want to encourage people to do. It may not always be perfectly comfortable for people who live in 2025. I get that. I totally do. And yet there is wisdom there that is worth mining and bringing to the present and making and having it inform how we are Jewish in the present era.
Mm-hmm. So would you define a proud Jew as somebody that has some sort of guiding path based on their perception of Judaism, or is there more to add to that? Because again, I'm just trying to think, like, you're obviously like, I agree with you to an extent. Like, you could not be religious and still be a proud Jew. And again, that people will probably disagree with me on that, but like, I'm a perfect, like, I don't keep Shabbat right now. I'm still a very proud Jew.
But you're still proud, right?
Exactly. I feel like your definition is not really about the actual doing piece. Maybe it's more about the text and like understanding your logic and using that to back up your actions piece. Does that make sense?
Say learning is doing. It's a form of doing.
Fair.
And it informs doing. So if you're doing without learning, what are you doing? Like, if you're
exactly.
just doing stuff because you have been told to do it, I don't know if that's necessarily healthy either. I would say understand why. One workshop that I truly love to do with people when they bring me to their community to be scholar in residence for a Shabbat, although I prefer nerd in residence, but somehow that's not taken off. I really enjoy walking them through and reacting together. We learn together and react together to a section from Tractate Shabbat, which is all about how the sages, what special thing they did to make Shabbat special to them. And so many of the things that we do to this day come directly from that sugya, that discussion, that part of the Talmud that's about their personal relationship, how they develop practices that weren't necessarily in the Torah itself. One example being lighting Shabbat candles, not in the Torah at all, in the Talmud. And you see them, like one rabbi would do, he would make the wicks for the Shabbat lamp. And the other guy, he would roast a large fish for Shabbat. Rav would roast a large fish for Shabbat. And Rav Papa, he had small fried fish. So it was like basically a lot of food-based enjoyment for Shabbat. But also like Kabbalat Shabbat comes from that exact passage. All these practices getting ready to welcome the personification of Shabbat as a woman, a bride or a queen, although rarely a hardworking woman who just got home from her commute and needs to feed her dog. Somehow that's not that. But there's all these references that directly from there inform what we do now. And when we learn this together, sometimes people are really blown away by this. Because if you don't think about where these practices come from, it, to me at least, there's something lost.
I think this is the case for every Jew, is we do things and we don't understand really why we are doing it. I guess like one example would be like the whole thing of like Kashrut, right? Like we don't, like, we do understand why we keep kosher, but I don't know. To me, I really don't understand the reason why we don't eat a pig, right? Like I do it because that's the rules of Kashrut. So I guess a question for you is, and this may be like getting way too deep in the weeds, but I feel like we're already here. So can, like, I guess like this is going to sound, I don't know if this is going to sound correctly off the tongue, but it's like your, I guess, like process of being a proud Jew is you read the text, you do, but then you have to have like the reason, you have to have the why from the text. How do people not create a why that's so far deviated from their teaching?
Can you give me an example of a why? Do you mean like how people would say about kashrut and stuff? Oh, this is so that you wouldn't get whatever sickness you eat if you eat a pig. Right. So like retconning. This is retconning, right? So this is working backwards to figure out, this makes sense because, or Jews do hand washing and thus they didn't get the plague, which isn't technically true. Okay, they got the plague. Right. So there's these ideas that sort of retroactively we look back and we try to understand them in a more informed context in terms of scientific understanding, perhaps. And I think it's fair to be like, sometimes the Torah, the Talmud, it just says stuff. It says, and I know perfectly well because this is how I was raised, sometimes God will ask things of us that won't necessarily make sense. And you do them because that is what is required to be a Jewish person, right? Or that is what it says, so that is what we must fulfill. But I don't want people to also get the idea that it's always been as clear as that. Yes, with the pig thing, that's very clear. I don't think you can get clearer about the pig thing. But we have discussions in the Talmud where people are really wrestling with a lot of things, where you've got Yosei HaGalilee, and he's like, I'm not giving up my chicken parm. He doesn't say that verbatim, but he doesn't understand why chicken is meat, right? Why is it meat? It's not meat. And he does not go along with the other sages on this issue. He holds fast that he can have that sandwich and it's fine. And I think there's these areas where it's very firm, and you can't really, like, you can't get away with the idea that if you're holding on to a Torah-based application of kashrut, let's say, I think there's a lot of other things that can be extrapolated, but I don't think realistically you can eat bacon and say you're keeping kosher.
Right.
It's okay if you do that. I'm not judging you for eating bacon. I'm just saying it's not kosher. That has to be true. Just because it says it very clear, not a lot of room to say it actually means a guinea pig. I don't think there's any like other explanation of that, but there certainly are areas of kashrut where people have made changes, and like, what about things that are developed now that aren't actually meat, but they look like meat? Like, what is the halacha? What is the law there? Because we're not supposed to do things that could be perceived as breaking a mitzvah. We're not supposed, nobody should think, chas v'shalom, God forbid, we're actually eating a cheeseburger, right? So then the fear is not only the cheeseburger itself, but looking like we're eating a cheeseburger. And sometimes that gets a little far. Like, I understand the fear that we don't want people to think XYZ thing. And also we have to understand that is a fence around a fence around a fence around the Torah. We're also supposed to put like a fence around the Torah so we don't get close to accidentally doing an oopsie whoopsie. But we also have to understand how people get to constructing these fences, where they should actually be. And maybe are there too many fences that we're straying so far from the plot? And I'm not making a judgment call necessarily on that. It's just something I have noticed as there are more forms of meat that does not come from actual, what is it? The amazing.
It's like, not
the amazing burger. What am I saying? Impossible burger.
Beyond Meat. Yep.
Yeah, right. There's these things that are not. You don't have to kill an animal to consume. Right. So that brings up a whole lot of other questions that aren't verbatim in the Torah or Talmud at all.
The point about the fence is very interesting, because I think you're right to an extent. Like, Jews will go so far out of their way to protect Jewish the holiness of being Jewish, such that I think a good example is if you're, and this was like kind of what my parents taught me growing up, like, if you're ever wearing a kippah and you have to go into a McDonald's to go to the bathroom, you take off your kippah.
Right.
Why?
Or put a hat over it. Yeah.
Or put a hat over it. Why? Because God forbid.
Chas v'shalom.
God forbid, chas v'shalom, another Jew sees you walking into McDonald's, they think, oh, it's okay to walk into McDonald's now. I don't know if that's saying that we follow each other too much, or is that really saying that we're protecting being Jew, like being holy and sacred? Because on one hand, it's like, if you know the person very well, let's say like I'm outside of McDonald's and I see my dad walking into McDonald's, I know with a kippah, I know he's probably going to the bathroom or whatever.
Right.
But on the other
he's
hand,
just buying a water.
Right. Or that. But chas v'shalom, you give a non-kosher institution money. God forbid.
I would say, look, I think you're allowed to, in my feeling, if you need water, stay hydrated. Go to a McDonald's, get the water.
Of course.
Truly. I also think there's this thing of us judging ourselves very harshly.
Oh, yeah.
So in that situation, I would hope that somebody would say, I don't understand the full context of this. Maybe he just needed to use the bathroom. Maybe he just needed some water. Maybe, maybe it's an emergency situation of some kind and he needs to eat something right now or he's going to pass out, which, there are scenarios where that is a thing you do because health, you must protect your health. That's a mitzvah, right? The assumption that it's always got to be the worst case scenario or somebody's doing something like scandalous, I think maybe we jump to that conclusion too frequently and we judge too harshly. I think with learning, people wouldn't necessarily go, oh, I can go to McDonald's? Then you probably shouldn't go to McDonald's. And I make the choice not to go to McDonald's. I don't know why this gentleman has gone to McDonald's, but that's not my place to judge. I'm going to mind my own business and keep not going to McDonald's. Like, it's not that hard. I think what that speaks to is the urge to follow without knowing why. And my whole thing is know why. So somebody would see a man with a kippah going into McDonald's, chas v'shalom, and they wouldn't necessarily go, oh, okay, I guess they have a hechsher now. I guess it's fine. They'd understand there was probably more to the story than that. And that doesn't necessarily mean McDonald's is now kosher. But it's this need to have the knowledge and the self-reliance and the self-awareness to not be a follower. Just because you witnessed one thing does not mean that you should do it too, right? Find out why. You're not going to walk into McDonald's and then make that decision for yourself. And whatever somebody else does, frankly, none of our business.
I like that. And I think there needs to be benefit of the doubt given. I just thought of my question that I'm going to really challenge you here.
Okay.
So get ready for this. So
do it.
You talked about having a why. It's been a common theme throughout this episode, and I 100% agree with you. Like having a why and not blindly following. Now, I think the tool where people blindly follow people is, of course, social media. And we're not going to get into this whole debate of like, oh, who's good on social media, who's bad on social media. But there are literally, and I find myself doing this with some people, like people literally like have these cults that they join on social media. Like let's be real. We know of cults on social media that exist that are blindly following. And I guess for somebody like you that has a very big following on social media, that has people that are following you, and you just alluded to your fans earlier in the episode, which of course is
great.
I would
say supporters. I shouldn't have said fans. I need
fans,
to be
supporters,
more humble.
Whatever.
Supporters,
okay. No,
friends.
You don't need to be more humble, Miriam. You need to hype yourself up more. I'm telling you. But I guess like as somebody that has a following on social media, how do you prevent people from kind of gravitating towards that culty part and like give people a legitimate reason to follow you?
I am so grateful for the people who follow me on, YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all the places where I post videos. And the social media landscape right now is so volatile, especially for Jewish people. I mean, for a lot of people, let's face it. But especially after 10/7, so many things changed in how many views, who sees my stuff. Like TikTok stopped showing my things for a long time, really. And I know that happened to so many Jewish creators. And, so many things are in flux there that unless you are a big, big, big account, there is no like true security. And there are massive Jewish accounts with like millions of followers, and they do stuff that this is not a criticism, more lifestyle. Like this is a day in my life as an Orthodox woman. And I love that stuff. And I think it is great. I know my stuff is far more niche than that. Right. Talmud is a very niche market, I will say.
Yes.
So I don't think I will ever have the kind of supporters who don't challenge me and don't push back. They're not like that. They enjoy it. They're there because they enjoy the content and because they might find it inspiring and they want to engage with it themselves. But this is why I always say that I am not a teacher. I do not want people to follow me. I want to walk with them. We're together side by side as equals on this path of learning. And wherever that goes, if they want to go with me, I'm delighted. And if they want to branch out and follow more learning in a different direction, I'm thrilled for them too. It's not about them following me because they think I'm all that. I think they just like spending time with me, and I like spending time with them and learning Jewish stuff with them and sharing the things that I'm just like really excited to talk about and I want to tell them about. And maybe they're just like, wow, I never heard that version of the story in Hebrew school. And I'm like, I know they had to censor it. But it's just about the joy of learning and sometimes the challenge. Let's face it, the challenge of learning. But it's not about them following me. It's about us doing this together. That's really what Daf Yomi is. We're
Right.
all doing this together. It's not like me following one rabbi or one teacher. I learn from a lot of different people, which is a blessing to be able to do, frankly. And I encourage people to learn from a lot of different people, get different perspectives. Mine is only my own perspective, brought from my own experiences, my own background, the things that I know, the pop culture references that I'm going to make. But there's so many other people out there who have truly great things to impart. So I want people to follow as many viewpoints as possible for them to get a fully more rounded understanding of what it means to learn Jewish things and encounter Jewish things. And yeah, engage with people on social media. Because the last thing I think that anyone really needs is parasocial relationships, which, I've had a few of those that can get very intense, where people do become rather obsessed. And that's not what I want. I want people to enjoy their time with me, learn something, go learn something on their own, go learn it with others, come back to me. We'll do this together as a journey, but don't look to me as like any sort of leader. I'm not. I'm just a nerd. I'm just a hype woman. That's what I am.
I think you're the first person to come on my podcast and say that they're like not a leader and you don't want followers. And I think
I want people to follow me on social media, but I don't want them to like adhere to everything I say.
right.
I want them to think for themselves. I truly
like
do.
that. I appreciate that point because we're in a very watered down place now. And I think it's important I think the challenge is for you, and this maybe is my final question, is like, you're on, obviously social media it's very accessible. It's easy to learn on social media, but if you want people to take action, like go sit down and learn Talmud, like on top of your videos, like how are you doing that? Because I feel like it's easy to consume the content, but then going to sit down and maybe watching like an hour video or whatever, it's a lot more challenging. So what are you doing to encourage people to really go off social media to also learn?
So I really like to encourage people to find a chavruta, a learning partner of their own, or find an institution or school that really speaks to them if they are interested in doing more learning. If they just want to stick around with me, I'm delighted and I'm honored. But I always tell them when they ask, does this count as doing Daf Yomi? I'm like, not really. I so appreciate that. But if you want to venture forth on your own, please do. And here's some great resources. I always tell them about Safaria, which is, I love them so profoundly much. I tell them about teachers who I admire and listen to. Dr. Sarah Ronas, one of my absolute favorite. Anytime there's something about demons in the Talmud, she's the person. Look up her books. I bring books and I talk about books that people can get and learn more from, and Jewish book reactions, which is this other thing that I do to help people find more resources. I do chavruta learning videos with my own chavruta to sort of model what that looks like and how fun it can be, to encourage people to do that themselves. And then I will do partnerships with organizations that I think are fabulous and try to, share with my audience that these sorts of opportunities are out there too. Pardes, is a phenomenal one. There's just so many Amud, like there's been so many that I just think are amazing and are geared maybe towards specific affinity groups that might be welcoming to a certain type of person, depending on what their background is, and they want to learn in that kind of context. And I hope to do actually more of that in the coming year. That's one of the goals I've set for myself, is do more collaboration so people who happen to follow me and may not follow these other places, organizations, peoples, groups, whatever it happens to be, they'll have these avenues to pursue if they want to. I always talk also about Hadran. I love them so much. I started listening because I started doing my learning in the beginning and it was like the pandemic, so much of the resources I used were online. And I know it's hard necessarily to find something local, but there are so many resources online, Hadran being one of them. I listen to that podcast by Rabbanit Michelle Farber every day. There's just a lot out there. And I hope in the coming year to share more of that with my audience, so that if they want to pursue this in more depth in a way that works for them, that they have ideas of how to do that and they feel like empowered to do that.
Yes.
I just want to be their gateway drug. That's what I am. Their Jewish learning gateway drug.
Jewish learning gateway drug. Wow. I did not think we were going to be talking about gateway drugs today, but here we are talking about a different kind of gateway drug. And Miriam, I think genuinely, like, not that it's a competition, but my podcast, I feel like I do a lot about branding and business, and I do some Jewish identity, but I feel like this was like one of the times where I genuinely spent so much time talking about Jewish learnings. And I feel like I need to do that more because there's so much debate. I love debate. I love to like get into like debates that are like deep, and, you know, I respect everybody's opinion. And I feel like here, there were definitely some times where like you said some things that I didn't necessarily agree with. And I probably said things you didn't agree with. And hey, listen, we're both here.
Fine.
It's perfect.
It's good.
It's an amazing thing. So I think just like note for me is like do more of things like this, because I feel like it's important to I think that my takeaway at least is understand the why, right? Like I brand myself as somebody that talks about personal branding and Jewish identity. And it's easy to talk about Jewish identity in the landscape of a New York Jew that has a bar mitzvah, goes to summer camp and wears their Magen David. But what's the why behind that? I feel like this episode was the why. So I appreciate you sharing your knowledge of just everything with us. And me personally, like, even if I don't know why nobody would learn anything from this episode, but I can guarantee you that I always say, like, I hope at the end of episode that at least somebody learned something and is inspired to do something. Like, I'm already inspired to do something. So thank you so much for doing that for me.
That makes me feel really wonderful. That's a huge bracha for me. Thank you.
Of course, Miriam.
A blessing. I feel very sincerely. Thank you so much. I would love to. One time we should chavruta sometime.
I would love that. I was going to say I have a chavruta, and we do once a week. We talk about. I mean, it ranges, but we started talking about just like Judaism in general, and then we got into like Kabbalah, which is like a whole other thing. Kabbalah is like so over my head, but I still do it anyway. But yes, I'm always open to having a chavruta or whatever, learning. Like I love learning, especially when it comes to Judaism. And I feel like if everybody understood that learning is not sitting there with, no offense, a 60-year-old rabbi with a gray beard boring you to death, learning is much more than that. And there's different avenues of learning. And I wish people would really understand that. So, and you're doing your part and promoting that on social media. So before we officially end things, plug yourself. Where can people find you on social media, on the internet, etc.?
Okay, everybody, you can find me, Miriam Anzovin. I know it's a long name. Let me spell it. MiriamAnzovin. And you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Threads, and hopefully more. I don't know. I'm going to try to figure out what other platforms I can get on in the coming year, but that's where I am right now. And I would love if you would follow me and add your voice to the comments in discussion on each video. I would love that. Thank you.
Follow Miriam. And by the way, if you got into this point in the episode and you didn't realize, she gives you permission to disagree with her. And I don't think there's not a lot of people on social media that, I mean, people turn off their comments, people do this. So like, go ahead, go disagree with her, obviously in a respectful way, but like go disagree with her, go have a conversation with her. I think it's a very unique opportunity. So make sure we're following Miriam. Also make sure to share the show with somebody. Again, this was a very this was a very non-Schmoozing Time episode in the way that we really got into Torah. We really got into the why of Talmud and the why of Judaism. So I think I would appreciate it. Miriam would appreciate it. I think you would appreciate it if you could share this with someone. Because listen, none of us really, I would say most of us, most of the time, we really don't understand the why why we're doing things. And I think AI, for example, like it's kind of taking our brain and automating a lot of things. So maybe let's come back for a second, understand the why behind Judaism, at least. Maybe you don't understand the why behind how you're writing this email or doing whatever, but at least understand the why behind your religion. So share this episode with somebody. We want to thank Miriam again. Until next time, keep schmoozing.